Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 12th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily by calling us at the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, and if you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to email me anytime, david.snider@noaa.gov. Here's a look at what's going on around your part of Alaska tonight in the Alaska Range, including the Denali National Park area, as well as Healy, and into the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, including the Delta Junction region. We're expecting some strong wind gusts, at least until midnight tonight. Strong southerly winds, perhaps sustained at 45 miles per hour, with some gusts upwards of 60 miles per hour may be possible. And of course, that could make driving through the cutoffs there a little bit more tricky, including some of the mountain passes. So be extra careful. Plan for some gusty winds. Hold on to the wheel as you're moving through there. And if you're expecting to take a late evening flight, plan on some bumpy conditions there, as turbulence will be a matter of caution for sure as you're moving about. But that should start to wind down after midnight tonight, after that pressure gradient relaxes just a bit more. Here's a look at what we see around the Drought Monitor. A new update there was provided to us on Tuesday. This from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, who organizes all of the drought information around the entire nation. And again, for the first time this year, we have seen drought conditions here across South, Central, and Southwest. First time for sure that we've been in our extreme drought. This is the drought scale. It goes from none, which is good, to D0, which is a little bit dry, listed as abnormally dry here. And it goes all the way up to D4, which is exceptional drought. We're not quite there yet, but we are in D3, which is not good. That's extreme drought, and that is still what we see here from just about Talkeetna all the way through Palmer, in the Wasilla region, through the Anchorage Bowl, and into the forelands of the Kenai Peninsula. The rest of the Kenai Peninsula itself is in severe drought, and that is bounded by dry conditions all the way from McGrath down through Port Heiden into the Alaska Peninsula. You can see Kodiak Island, the entirety there in severe drought. Drought conditions extend into southeast, and this is long-term drought now, several years worth of dry conditions for central and southern parts of southeast, still listed in at least D2 and D3 drought for most of southeast. So the drought continues despite the rain that we've had in the region. Now, fire weather conditions are improving. That's the good news there. No substantial change, at least in conditions there. We'll show you the map in just a minute, but want to make sure that you know that as drought conditions continue in your neighborhood and in your part of Alaska, it's important to let the drought researchers know, what does that mean where you live if you didn't see good blueberries this season? And that's something that you're normally accustomed to getting, the monster blueberries out there, or the salmon berries aren't just right this year, and you think it's probably got something to do with the drought. They'd like to know. droughtreporter.unl.edu/map. Just click on the submit report right here, and you can let the drought researchers and the monitor folks know, hey, this is what we're seeing this year, and it's because we haven't had any rain. If things aren't growing right, if it's the berries, if the animals are doing something weird, this can help. And this means a lot of really good information is getting to the people that understand and put it all together. So this can eventually help you if you submit a report like that. So I encourage you to do that if you haven't yet. Fire danger now, no big change from yesterday. We're seeing most of the rain really still out across the west. Some of that has been working its way into the interior, but this area here across the interior all the way down into the Tanana Valley out toward Bettles is still really dry. And so we're starting to see those dry spots kind of creep back up as we're not getting sustained rain moving through the region. Now the Copper River Valley is still very dry, and that on top of the wind coming through, not a great situation, and still keeping that fire danger high. We've seen the Kenai Peninsula and the Anchorage Bowl kind of fall off of that fire danger map. It's still dry, but it's not as dry and perhaps as dangerous as it once was. And many of the fire bans have been released for at least south central locations. Make sure you check on your latest information for your community, and I certainly can't speak for the fire officials where you live, but many things have been improving. So before you burn, make sure you check on conditions and make sure everything's A-OK to do that, and always be careful with fire. As you look at the satellite picture across the region, the big weather picture is really being driven by remnants of Typhoon Ling Ling. It is no longer a typhoon, but the moisture in that circulation center is still kind of there, so it doesn't have the power it once did, but it certainly has the moisture, and that moisture is working through the region. The other part of that is Typhoon Fazia is working through the region. Kind of sounds like Fozzie Bear or Fabio, right? So it's kind of moving through the region. A lot of moisture pulling up through the Kenai Peninsula and through Anchorage, and that's kind of got the cloud cover going for us, but it's certainly got the wind working up over the Alaska Range, and a lot of that's been pulling off into the west. So as this spreads northward, it's going to keep things fairly mild for the interior, but this means rain for southeast. It is going to rain there, and winds are going to come up in a few places, probably see a couple gales developing. Small craft advisories will be possible and probably fairly likely in the inside and outside passages there. As we watch the animation one more time, you notice that low pressure is working right over St. Paul and St. George, and this is going to work its way into the Bristol Bay region. For a time, this was providing a really strong southerly wind into our south-facing shorelines around Quingilligock, all the way up toward the South Seward Peninsula coastline, Nome Council Road, all the way out toward Galvin. We're seeing kind of the water come up a little bit there. A lot of that has eased off, so the high surf advisories and that threat for coastal high surf and maybe even some minor flooding, that has backed off a little bit. And we do have another storm coming behind that. You can see that on the satellite picture there, just gradually creeping into the western parts of the Aleutians. But by and large, the big focus for active weather going forward is going to be across the eastern Gulf in the next couple days, and then spreading rain and wind into the interior, and then that should start to back off as we head into the weekend. So some good news there. In the meantime, on the visible satellite picture, you can clearly see the North Slope is just socked in. A lot of fog there with a deep high pressure system that's stacked and packed all the way up into the Arctic Ocean there. So that strong north and easterly push, pushing that cool and wet air up into the range and slowly condensing that moisture and just kind of locking that in place. So if you've been trying to get back and forth to the North Slope today and having trouble, that's probably why. Low pressure sitting across the Pribilofs right now at 972 millibars. That orange line all the way around, I'm sorry, the purple line, what am I talking about? The purple line is the occluded front, and it is bringing in that moisture all the way across southwestern Alaska. Behind that, along the capes, you're getting a little bit of a southwesterly flow, but it's not quite as strong as it was before. That initial burst was a lot stronger. Northwesterly winds are coming in behind this, and that's bringing in some cooler weather. It does look like overall we are kind of catching up to cool conditions that would be more typical for this time of the year after a raging hot summer. Low pressure working across Kodiak Island at 986 millibars is bringing a triple point where the warm air, the cold air, and the already mixed up air is working through. That's right over Kodiak Island there. So winds are probably switching a lot of different directions there, and you're going to continue to see rain and wind through the rest of the evening. And we have a low pressure system that's just north and west of the Pacific Northwest that's sitting outside of Haida Gwaii and the Dixon entrance at 1,003 millibars. So we've got a lot of moisture meeting up right here across the Gulf that's working right into southeastern Alaska. And also, I should not hesitate to mention that if you are in Eagle, we know there is a lot of smoke, but the smoke is not coming from Eagle as best we understand. It's coming from Mayo and areas across the Alcan border toward Dawson. If you look at a satellite picture, you can see that smoke has really gotten down into the Yukon River Valley, just filled up all the canyons there and the nooks and crannies. A lot of smoke, really poor visibility around Eagle today. Even some ash may be falling from the sky in that area, so not a great weather day as far as air quality goes in Eagle. Hopefully that gets better for you. As we look at the weather map, one opportunity for that to improve would be more of a south wind, kind of pushing that smoke out of the way and back into western Canada. As we look at tonight, you'll notice a large part of southeast could see moderate rainfall, maybe occasionally heavy there around Sitka and points southward into Port Alexander. Behind that, we still have the opportunity for some convection. Not really sold on the opportunity for thunderstorms, but showers, certainly possible. We could have a couple towering cumulus clouds as this system passes through, with that cold center allowing warm air to bubble up and make some bigger clouds. Up north, the fog continues there. Watch for that to continue into the next couple days. Areas of rain, drizzle, and maybe some fog across the central and western parts of the Yukon Valley out toward the Seward Peninsula, of course. And here's our next weather system marching eastward. And again, you can see that triple point, the warm, cold, and the mixed up air all coming together right across the central Aleutians. And once again, we've got that thunderstorm symbol in there, symbolizing that opportunity for rising air, which could mean at least a little bit of a burst or two of some moderate to heavy rainfall when that is working through, and likely a little bit more wind around that center as well. A brief ridge of high pressure here may break up the clouds for Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and Nikolsky, and then that all swings back into low pressure across the Gulf. Showers and rain at times across southeast. Still have some showers and unsettled weather across the Gulf. Rain sloshing up into the higher terrain around south central. Will it rain in the Anchorage area and Cook Inlet region? Well, it depends on exactly which way that wind's blowing. If that's coming up over the mountains, over the Kenai Mountains, and then from east to west, chances are it's going to be kind of a gloomy day, probably not a wet day. Areas of clouds and drizzle for the North Slope. You can see that kind of sagging area of cloud cover here. That's the fog sticking around. It doesn't go anywhere on Saturday. In fact, you can see high pressure trying to creep further and further southward toward Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, Kaktovik. West of the Pribilofs, a 997 millibar low there. This is the low that is working over the western chain. It's creeping eastward and north, and with that, we start to move in some showers back into southwestern Alaska. Low pressure sitting right over the Bering Strait, weak, but helping to draw that moisture northward. And then we still have showers lingering across southeastern Alaska with showers into the Copper River Valley, which would be good. And a trough of low pressure sitting close to Cook Inlet, also helping to keep air moving across the region. Let's take a quick check of your temperatures here. As you see overnight, 30s and 40s for the North Slope, cooling down in Kaktovik. Still above freezing though. 48 in Nome, 47 for Gamble and Savunga. Southwest, Bristol Bay, looking at temps in the mid to upper 40s there. 46 in Bethel, nearly 50 in Kodiak. 40s and 50s for Southeast. Ketchikan and Annette still fairly mild, and about 50 for Adak and Atka. Highs on Friday in the 50s and 60s, cooling down with rain-cooled air for you. 50s for most areas in south central. A lot of cloud cover here, but with all that wind moving north, it could reach 70 again in Fairbanks, 65 in Eagle, and hopefully a better air quality day for you. 40s for the North Slope and mild. Upper 50s for most of Southwest, and nearly 60 in areas closer to Bethel. Macoriac about 56, Sandpoint 57 degrees, and Kodiak looking at 58.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. We'll see the leftovers of tropical cyclone Ling Ling still moving into south and west and south central Alaska, eventually spreading moisture and some of its storm energy into southeastern Alaska. But we still have some areas of convection around Bristol Bay and the southwestern Capes that should be noted there. We're not expecting any widespread thunderstorm activity, but showers and maybe a thunderstorm could be possible there in some of the more active segments of the storm as it's working ashore. The most noticeable thing you're going to see is poor visibility and lowered ceilings, as well as some periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain, as we've been talking about. And that translates into IFR conditions around Lake Iliamna, northward into the Alaska Range, and points west out to the southwestern Capes, just south of Bethel. For most of the Gulf Coast and really most of southeast, tomorrow morning, IFR will start your day for the Yukon Valley, Tanana Valley, really most of the Kuskokwim, and as you head northward into the Kobuk and Noatak, and even the Koyukuk, things look pretty good. Looks like a generally VFR sailing tomorrow morning. IFR conditions across the North Slope, it looks to be fairly socked in and low, as well as areas around the Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass region, especially as you move through the north side or coming in from the north. You're going to see very low conditions. Things get a lot better really fast once you get through the pass, if you can make it through the pass. Friday afternoon, Yukon Valley looks pretty clear. VFR conditions expected there. IFR conditions north of the Brooks Range Pass and all along the Arctic coast. Out across the west, another surge of convection comes in to the west and southwestern parts of the Aleutians as the next zone of low pressure starts to work in. MVFR conditions really from St. Paul to St. George up toward Macoriac, and then again still some leftover areas of convection for the afternoon. IFR expected across the higher terrain for southeast and most of the Wrangell-St. Elias region into the Chugach, as well as Seward, though Seward could be a little bit lower. That's the red dot you see on the map, as well as areas in the western Alaska Range. For Saturday morning, IFR is setting in once again across the Arctic coast down toward the Brooks Range. Out across the west, IFR spreading northward now across the central and western chain. Leftover convection still working through parts of the central and eastern Gulf with IFR across the higher terrain, and hit and miss around south central. Most of the interior is looking pretty good, and that should continue into Saturday with lingering IFR across parts of the Alaska Range. South and west, you can see the next weather systems working toward the southwestern coastline and spreading up through the central and eastern Aleutians, with IFR approaching but maybe not quite making it to the Pribilofs for your Saturday. Here's your pass conditions to wrap up the week. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, as I said, going to be pretty low, it looks like, really most of your Friday. The north side will be the worst. The south side, as you get into The Yukon Flats and areas up north in the interior, things look pretty good. In the North Slope, not so much. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be IFR, it looks like, most of the day, and we expect similar conditions for Rainy Pass. Windy Pass probably starts there, but gets a little bit better as the day goes on toward MVFR. Marginal conditions expected by day's end in Isabel Pass. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule. Tenita Pass, IFR conditions there, heading over into MVFR. Portage Pass, we expect to see instrument flight rule throughout the day. At Chilkoot and White Pass, looking for IFR conditions there. Freezing levels show that cool pool of air left in the wake of what is and once was Tropical Cyclone Ling Ling. Areas of low pressure there will drag the freezing levels down to about 6,000 feet or so out ahead of that. Still looking at 8 to even 10,000 feet across parts of southeast. Most of the interior at or between 6 to about 8,000 feet, and then you can see another surge of warm and wet air building in to the western Aleutians. Icing potential is starting to show up a little bit more now as we are looking at about 6 to 7,000 feet for areas in the cooler sectors of the state. About 7 to 9,000 feet around south central to about 8,000 feet around Kodiak Island for some isolated moderate icing potential. There certainly is a lot of moisture out there, and each one of these waves of low pressure grabs just a little bit more of that autumn cool air. The jet stream right now has low pressure sitting across the Gulf with 155 knots on the south side of that, zinging right into the Pacific Northwest. Low pressure out across the western Bering. Some stronger northerly winds up to 90 knots there on the west side. On the east side, 150 knots building into the Bering Sea. So it looks like this. Low pressure is sitting across the Gulf now. We have some faster winds across the Alaska Peninsula and most of the Gulf, 30 to 50 knots there. Light winds for the interior, northerlies coming ashore, bringing in those lower ceilings and visibilities there, and an offshore wind for the west coast for the most part. And you can see that continues at 3,000 feet. Wind speeds around 15 to 20 knots there in the northwest, but much stronger across the Alaska Peninsula and the Gulf, anywhere from 25 to almost 40 knots. Southwesterlies coming ashore for southeast, again, all wrapping around that low pressure system. Turbulence, a little bit of chop around the Dixon entrance tomorrow, around the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and just north of the Yukon below 4,000 feet. But the main action continues to be in the Alaska Peninsula and the chain below 3,000 to 4,000 feet, isolated severe in the central chain.
Finding direction in the night sky. Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dehne Regis, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. Hey James, are you seeking direction in your life?
Why? Have I seemed more aimless than usual?
No, you're definitely not lost in space. I'm talking about how the stars can tell you your direction, like which way is north, south, east, and west.
Aha! This is a great month to share our tips for finding Polaris, aka the North Star.
And along the way, we'll show you the Big Dipper, Little Dipper, and Cassiopeia, the 3 major constellations of the northern sky. And we'll visit a flying horse, too.
Let's show you.
Okay, we have our sky set to any night this week at 9 p.m. facing north. Since we're facing north, the North Star should be there somewhere, but where is it?
Contrary to popular opinion, the North Star is not the brightest star in the sky. That honor belongs to Sirius, the dog star. In fact, Polaris ranks about 48th in brightness, and through city light pollution, it's just barely visible.
Well, what makes Polaris so darn special? Let's fly up there to take a closer look.
Polaris resides almost directly over our North Pole. So, as Earth rotates, this causes day and night and also the daily motion of the stars. But look, the North Star barely moves.
That means this star shines in the northern sky all night, making it the perfect stellar sentinel. As the world turns and the night goes on, the stars appear to rotate in a counterclockwise motion. This motion gives us the appearance that the sky spins once a day with a pivot point at Polaris.
Of course, it's the Earth that's spinning, not the sky.
Since the Little Dipper has some very faint stars, finding the North Star can be tough. But never fear, the other Dipper is here. The Big Dipper is much more distinct, and you can find it in the northwestern sky this evening. The ancient Greeks and some Native American groups called these stars a big bear. But have you ever seen a bear with a tail like that? Looks more like a raccoon to me.
Nevertheless, we're going to star hop and use the more notable stars of the Big Dipper as pointers. Connect the dots of the two stars at the end of the Big Dipper's spoon. They're called Merak and Dubhe. Continue that line up and to the right, and bingo, they'll point you right to Polaris.
We're not done with the Big Dipper's pointer stars yet. If you go from the Big Dipper to the North Star, keep going, because you will then run into a star at the top of a W-shaped constellation. The star's name is Calf, and now you've discovered Cassiopeia the Queen. Can you see the beautiful, boastful queen sitting on her throne?
No.
Me neither. So, I picture these stars as her crown glittering in the northeastern sky.
Ah, that's better. And Cassiopeia is easy to find as you hop across the heavens. The distance between the Big Dipper and Polaris is the same as the distance from Polaris to Cassiopeia. But wait, there's more. Hop from the Big Dipper's spoon to Polaris onto Cassiopeia and make one more hop. This will take you to the corner of a huge square of 4 stars, and we've landed on one corner, a star called Alpheratz.
This is really the body of Pegasus the flying horse. Let's see the picture. Yikes, that definitely takes some imagination. I guess that kind of looks like a horse.
It may be hard to picture, but it's easy to find once you begin star hopping. And remember Alpheratz? This star not only marks Pegasus's flank, but it also is the head of the beautiful Princess Andromeda. She looks like a long, stretched out letter A. So, the Big Dipper will point you to a ton of stars and constellations. First, follow the end of the spoon to Polaris, then on to the W,
Cassiopeia,
then to the Great Square,
Pegasus. And now that you can find the North Star, you'll never be lost again. Keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your marine weather now. Obviously no substantial change in the ice pack there, but we are approaching the sea ice minimum for the season. This is the latest analysis as of September 12th, and as always, you can get your latest information from the Alaska Sea Ice Program. Weather.gov/anchorage/ice will get you there. We're still watching a little bit of marginal ice caught up in the Beaufort Gyre, but at this point, no new ice is forming there or refreezing. As we look at southeast, a strong southeasterly flow will start to pick up a little bit. A couple gales closer to the outer coast are possible, but right now we're seeing mainly small craft advisories for your Friday. Looked like gusts up to 35 knots there around the Lynn Canal with a 4-foot sea on a 20-knot wind from the south. Southeasterlies also going strong through Stevens Passage. Not as gusty across Clarence Strait. Look for sustained winds at 20 across the outer coast with seas 8 to 10 feet. For Saturday, a north and westerly flow coming down toward Cross Sound and into Gustavus. Look for a south and easterly flow wrapping into low pressure that's pulling away from southeast at this point. Looks like generally light winds on the inside. 2 to 3 foot seas are possible, and conditions should improve a little bit as you get into Saturday with rain still in the region. South Central looking like southeasterlies at 15 with 2-foot seas on Friday inside of Prince William Sound. Light winds for Cook Inlet, 10 knots, 3-foot seas there. Southerlies in the western Gulf at 15 knots, looking for 9-foot seas. Generally a south and southwesterly flow heading up toward Hitchinbrook entrance. And generally light winds continue for Saturday as well. Northerlies inside and outside of Prince William Sound up to 15 knots outside of Hitchinbrook entrance. 5 to 7-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. For Cook Inlet, 10 knots and maybe 2-foot seas. A light southwesterly breeze coming up northern parts of the inlet with a westerly flow over the Barrens and into Kamishak Bay and Kachemak Bay for that matter. 20 knots and 5 to 6-foot seas on Saturday. For the Alaska Peninsula, expect westerlies crossing over Perryville, Sandpoint, and Cold Bay. 15 to 18-foot seas on the east side there around the Pacific waters, and a north and westerly flow coming into the Bering Sea coast. 20 to 35. The strongest winds will be down the Bering Sea coast there, with 19-foot seas possible. 11-foot seas around Kodiak Island and southwesterlies coming up through Shelikof Strait with a 15-knot wind and 4-foot seas there. On Saturday, conditions improve, 15 to 20 knots in all areas, 5 to 7-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, and you're looking at about 15 to 20 across the Pacific waters, 15 knots, 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait Saturday. Westerlies are still blowing through the Bering Sea coast as we look at Friday in the Aleutians, 30 to 35 knots there, 17 to 20-foot seas are possible. Looking for 14 to 15-foot seas across the Pacific waters, 25 to 30 there. And already the winds are curving back into the next weather system that's moving into the western chain on Friday. 30 to 35 knots with 11 to 12-foot seas, expecting that to come around to south and southwesterly on Saturday. 13 to 14-foot seas on a 30-knot wind, and still 25 to 30 from the south and southwest for the central and eastern chain. Again, the winds will be building as we go through the rest of the weekend in the west. For south and western Alaska and the west coast, look for northerlies coming in behind that low pressure system tracking eastward. 15 to 20 knot wind in most areas, 25 for the Kuskokwim Delta and around the Pribilofs. 12 to 17-foot seas will be the highest we see in this region right now. As we get into Friday, as we look at Saturday, conditions improve, but the winds switch around and start building in from the south again, all in advance of the weather system that's well to your west. Look for a light south and westerly flow into Norton Sound. Northerlies off of St. Lawrence Island at 20 knots, and an easterly flow out around St. Matthew, 20 knots and 6-foot seas there on Saturday. For Friday, across the North Slope, 15 knots to about 20 or so from Kaktovik to Utqiagvik, north and easterlies there with a 3 to 4-foot sea. A stronger east and northerly flow feeding into low pressure that's still moving across southern Alaska at this point. 25 to 30 knots there with 6 to 8-foot seas on Friday. Not a big change there on Saturday, still looking at north and northeasterlies across the Beaufort Sea coast there for the Chukchi coast, 25 knots and 6 to 7-foot seas in most areas as we wrap up the weekend there. Recapping tonight's weather, low pressure is still moving across southern Alaska. That's going to push a front into southeast, bring up the winds, and probably make it rain tonight, tomorrow, and into Saturday in most areas. Across the North Slope, fog and low clouds will be possible. If you're flying through Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, check flight conditions carefully. It does look like you'll be encountering widespread IFR conditions at least into Friday and probably Saturday for many coastal areas there. Pockets of rain, drizzle, and fog for Norton Sound and parts of the Seward Peninsula tonight. Low pressure working across Bristol Bay with some gusty winds across the Alaska Peninsula. This is a tropical cyclone remnant. It has a lot of moisture, but it doesn't have an awful lot of wind. However, it will be blustery through the Alaska Range, and wind advisories are posted for the Denali and McKinley area, as well as Healy, eastward toward Delta Junction, and through the eastern Alaska Range. Gusts there up to 60 miles per hour tonight through midnight. Low pressure moving back into the western Aleutians. It's another weather system coming in as we move into the weekend. Low pressure out to the west of the Pribilofs by Saturday afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.